Hello, my name is Corinne Lindsay, and welcome to my multimedia presentation for this week on Frederick Taylor's Scientific Management and Mary Parker Follett's The Giving of Orders. I'll begin with an overview of each theory and how it relates to today's public administration, and then I'll move on to talk about how the giving of orders still rings true with today's modern public administration and how scientific management needs an update from the industrial age of public administration. Hello. Okay, we'll start with Taylor's scientific management. There are 4 principles I'd like to discuss. The first is how we wanted to develop a scientific approach for each element of work. This is each tiny little aspect of the entire project is to be broken down into the smallest of elements so it can be tested and timed and looked at and to make it faster and easier and to do it more efficiently. We see this in public management today by how managers watch their employees and see how they can make them work faster and more efficient. And then this particular way of faster and more efficient eventually becomes policy that all others now have to abide by. Most of us have policy and procedure manuals to go by, and they must be adhered to if you value your job anyways. The second is Taylor wanted to use this science to select and train and develop each worker from management all the way down. And we see this in our hiring process of public administration. There are certain qualifications addressed prior to applying for the job. Then there are certain questions asked during the interview that assess each skill level of the work or whatever the position that they applied for. And I see this in certain circumstances where I currently work that someone may put in for a specific position, but throughout the hiring process, it was found they were more suited for another position. And they were asked if they would like to apply for that position. And then you have to start all over again because everyone has to be treated fairly. So, anyways, the third principle I would like to discuss was how the organization is to cooperate with workers to ensure that jobs are being done and that these jobs match the plans or procedures and the principles or the policies. Evaluations are great examples of this and how it applies to public administration. Administrator or supervisor watches and reviews the employee's performance and evaluates it towards the standards of the organization. Lastly, Taylor wanted to ensure an appropriate division of labor. This can be seen in several areas of public administration. There is the hierarchy or chain of command where I work. This is where the division of labor is disseminated from the top down. The top has the highest level of liability, and the bottom usually has the highest level of workload or output for the organization. Everyone has their particular job description, which clearly illustrates what they are expected to be able to do and they should be willing to perform. And here we have areas of focus. Taylor described 3 essential areas of focus for his scientific management. There is the task performance, or the worker completing the task efficiently. Then there's the supervision of the task or the worker performing that task to make sure they're following those policies and procedures that we previously talked about. And lastly, there must be a motivation for the efficiency of the task. So Taylor talks about managerial practices with regards to two things. The first is time and motion study, where the managers use a stopwatch or something similar to see exactly how long it takes a worker to do a certain aspect of these tasks and figuring out if this is the most efficient way to do that particular part of the task. It's broken down further and further until the task turns into a series of movements to complete it and make it efficiently. The second managerial practice Taylor put forth was the least popular one of price rate incentive, or what he called the price rate incentive system. He believed that this time motion study would turn into efficient practices for the workers to put out more and more product, thus making more money for the owners, who would then pass that extra money or extra income down to the workers. Geez, is Taylor naive or what? Now we move on to Follett's The Giving of Orders theory. Follett talks about administration or management on a more psychological platform. She tells us that you're not going to get anyone to do anything, at least at their very best of their abilities, by ordering them around. People at their very nature want to be free to do things their own way, and they have a primal instinct to go against the very things people tell us to do. If you look at Adam and Eve, we all know that we are here today and exposed to great suffering because they simply did not want to obey an order. We see this every day in public administration with the chain of command I spoke about earlier. I work in the police department, and we are very paramilitary in our organization. The day is filled with orders from the top on down. Some are okay with this, and many will find they are okay to a certain point, and then they become angry by the orders after time passes on. I'm guilty of this as well. At some point you just get tired of it, and especially when you're not quite understanding where they're coming from or the reasoning behind them. We're all reasonable people and we think about these things. It's very difficult to try to get somebody to not think, which we'll talk about later when I do the comparison between Follett and Taylor. So Follett says, in order to combat this resistance to these orders, you must stop giving them. Just change the entire pattern of behavior, or what she calls habit patterns. Follett tells us to build certain productive habit patterns. When the employer is considering an order, they should also think about a way to form the habit that will ensure the order is carried out. And this includes good tactics. If I want to get people to turn their hours in for their paychecks, this is an example from my work. If I want to get people to turn in their hours on time, I must make them understand the necessity of getting paid, which is a good thing. Obviously everybody wants to get paid. Therefore, there should be some compliance. So furthermore, Follett tells us that a heightened self-respect will produce a more quality output. If you tell people they're doing a good job publicly, they will take pride in themselves and what they do. We do this where I work with a performance observation form. We can fill it out and identifying what the employee has done. And then that is so great. And then we would give it to them, read it aloud at a briefing in front of everyone. I also wanted to talk about pride and ownership. So when you allow the employee to take a type of ownership in their work, they work harder to make it great. Basically, they're putting their signature on it. Here I'm going to compare Follett's giving of orders theory and how I believe it still rings true today with Taylor's scientific management theory and how I believe it needs an update, to say the least. In today's public administration, people don't want to be what is called micromanaged. They don't want the bosses looking over their shoulder, watching their every move. Workers today do not want to be menialized. They want to know that their work makes a difference. I've seen those college billboards that say difference maker on them. And most of all, I think people just do not want to be expendable. So all of these things are exactly what Taylor Scientific Management does. The boss is looking over their shoulder constantly with his little stopwatch. The work is pretty trivial and could probably be taught to an ape. And this makes them expendable. And, on that last note, I don't think Taylor meant for this expendability. I think he wanted to broaden the pool of workers to be able to do the task so the company could hire more and more qualified workers, not just replace those who get an attitude with somebody else. And the reason I think this is because he was so naive to think that owners would not be selfish and would pass on the extra income to the workers, that we all know doesn't ring true. And I guess that's another moral issue that can be talked about later. Nonetheless, Follett's giving of orders is more along the lines of today's public administration. People want to be valued and heard. They want to feel like they're in charge of their own destiny. They want all these things, and she talks about the give and the take. She said the workers, if they had their say, they would have no supervision at all. And she didn't agree with this. I mean, it's pretty obvious for the organization to function properly, there should be some sort of supervision. Otherwise, those with less morals or ethics would run amok. But basically, if a supervisor heightened their self-respect and fostered good habit patterns instead of just blind orders to the worker, then the worker would be amenable to this type of supervision. So if you look at the illustrations below, which one would you rather work for? And here we've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Here are my references with where I received most of the content and some of the photographs. Thank you, and farewell.